Hey, Johnny here, and you may remember the glass river table I built for my wife over 3 years ago. Well, during our recent move, that $450 piece of glass broke. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Which, of course, I didn't catch on video. So this build, I'm going to repurpose those slabs from that table to build a new table, which I'm then giving away to one of you. And I'll explain that giveaway later on in the video. So after having this table in my house the last 3 years, there are some things that I love about it and some things that I didn't love or maybe didn't fit the overall vibe of the piece. And if it was like 3 years ago when I was remaking this table, I'd probably just dump 10 gallons of epoxy in the middle and just call it good. But honestly, I'm over epoxy river tables. So instead, what I have in mind is a series of stitches tying the middle or the river section all together. But first I have to cut off that live edge with that 1/4-inch recess where that glass used to sit. And I was kind of faced with two choices here. Either I cut off that live edge like I'm doing, or I flatten the whole table to match that height, which would leave me with about 1.25 inch thick table, which for a table this size, that's just way too thin. So right away, I decided I needed to cut this table down in size, and this is why I won't just be reusing the old table base. And I'm cutting it down because I'm giving this table away to one of you viewers, and an 8-foot long table is likely too large for most folks' homes. And it's too large for our new house, which is the reason why I recently built that Kamiko table for my wife, Katie. But I think something closer to 7 foot long would accommodate more people who are interested in winning this table. And by the time I was done, it was actually closer to 6 foot long, so that's even better. I also didn't like all the black epoxy crack fills on top of this table, and I guess I thought it looked good 3.5 years ago, but my tastes have changed and I'm starting to look at using epoxy in my projects in a different way than what I used to. I'm also no longer a fan of the Wenge bow ties, especially the X-shape inlay over that chainsaw defect. That X just didn't mesh well with the vibe of the tabletop, and the Wenge bow ties, much like the epoxy, are just too stark of a contrast with the very light color of the cottonwood. And like usual, I'm pressed for time on this build. I have less than a week and a half to finish the table, record, and edit a YouTube video. So for that reason, I'm going to use as many digital manufacturing tools as I can to speed up certain tasks, like using my 3D scanner to map out the layout of the table so I can create a vector drawing and use that to map out where the stitches go and how the two slabs are going to tie together. But fear not, all you woodworking enthusiasts, I am going to inlay a series of patches by hand all over this table to cover the existing bow ties and defects and epoxy crack fills. And as someone who has not done a lot of fine hand chiseling in my woodworking career, I really had a lot to learn and many reps to put in, but I very much enjoyed this part of the build. Now, I talk all the time about trusting the process and putting in the reps, and with over 30 patches to inlay on this tabletop all by hand, I got to put in a lot of reps. And real quick, I want to say a thank you to all of you who have supported this channel by buying my merch, and I'm excited to announce the newest t-shirt to the lineup, the Put in the Reps tee. And it's so new that I couldn't even physically get one in to show you guys before this video came out, but all of my shirts are designed by the amazing Brandon Cutter, my personal tattoo artist, and they're all done in the American traditional tattoo style. But even if you're not into getting inked up like I am, these designs are for everyone. I mean, they're just objectively cool, and you can be too. Also, it's a great way to remind yourself to put in the reps, or trust the process, or wing it, or that you're a maker. So thanks to everyone that supports the channel by buying one of my shirts, and check out the links below for more details. Now, I try to make it very obvious in these videos that I often don't know what I'm doing, but rather that I like to dive right in there and learn, with the idea that if I don't know something, that I'll just wing it. Now, not in the sense that I'm just gonna blindly push forward, but more the idea that every problem has a solution if you're just willing to take the time and just sort of work through it. And pretty much all my skills in the shop came about from this idea. I've never had any sort of formal woodworking training. It's all been trial and error, research, reading, and just like you're doing right now, watching videos on YouTube. I didn't even take shop class in high school, although I certainly wish I had. And here's a quick PSA to encourage all you parents out there. encourage your kids to take shop or woodworking or just some sort of like make or trade in school if that's available. But what I do have going for me is that when I get into a hobby, I really get into that hobby. And my wife, Katie, likes to tell me often that I'm all or nothing. And I can't really argue with that. I mean, she's much better at moderation and work-life balance than I am. I'm either all in or all out. And as a quick example of that, a few years ago, I took a trip to Mexico and was on a tour of a cenote. And while we were snorkeling, a group of divers came over, they hopped in the water, and off they went exploring the cenote up close and at depth. And I remember being fascinated and immediately wanting to take scuba diving lessons. So, cut to a year later, and at this point, I'm a certified dive master whose life mainly revolved around which dive trip I was going to take next. And it stayed like that for years. That is, until I found running. And at first, running and diving were able to coexist. But cut to a few years later, and I decided that just running marathons isn't good enough. I need to run ultra marathons in the mountains and do that on trails. And it completely took over my life, and that's all I did for years, and scuba diving just completely disappeared from my life. And if I was traveling somewhere, it was for a race, and that's honestly how I thought the rest of my life would go. But then came woodworking. And I don't remember if I ever shared the story of how I got into woodworking, but essentially I got sick of buying cheap, crappy furniture and wanted to start making my own cheap, crappy furniture. And remember, like I said, I'm all or nothing, and predictably, woodworking took over my life and I completely stopped running. And now woodworking, or rather making in general, is the biggest part of my life, and clearly I'm not a runner anymore. There might not be anything healthy about my approach to life, but that's just the way I'm wired. So I was able to take that 3D scan of the table and turn that into a vector drawing, which then I used to lay out the cutouts for the stitches and then program the CNC to carve all of those. And these turned out mostly good, but a few stitches were a little off and I needed to fill those in with more patches. And then not wanting to lose my work zero location on the CNC, I just did all this patchwork while the slabs were still screwed down to the CNC, but this did not go well, and it caused me to have to make a decision right here. I don't know what it is, but for the last couple weeks, I felt cursed in the shop, just the amount of simple things that have gone wrong. And I'm dealing with the same thing on this project. We had the erroneous carve, and then I thought I fixed it, but I forgot to add that offset. So I ruined it again. Andy's like, why don't you just cut it off? Initially, I was like, I don't want to lose the length, but we're talking 8 inches. It's still going to be over a 6-foot long table, and that's a good sized dining table. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut it off, and I'm literally going to cut my losses. I know how divisive bow tie inlays are, and honestly, I don't really understand folks that don't like them, but it seems about half the folks that watch my videos don't like bow tie inlays. And as a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet half of you are gonna hate what I'm about to do to this table, and that's totally fine. It's all about your personal choice and what you like, and I'm genuinely curious as to what the reaction is gonna be from viewers watching this table build. Now, I've talked about it in the past about how I like to highlight imperfections and then turn those imperfections into a focal point of a table, but never has that been so true as it is on this piece. And throughout my videos, several folks in the comment sections have rightly noted that what I often do is akin to the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, or to really simplify it, finding beauty in the imperfections around you. And that's the idea of this table. So with that wabi-sabi in mind, I'm gonna fill the middle of the void of the 2 slabs, not with glass, not with epoxy, but rather wooden stitches. Stitches that will highlight the void without completely filling it up. Stitches that make this imperfection a focal point. Stitches that are bound to make a certain number of you viewers think that every dish that's set upon this table will eventually fall through those gaps to its demise. And stay tuned to the end of the video where I'm going to test this out with some actual dishes. And you guys already know that I'm a sucker for the combination of Purple Heart and walnut, so I designed a series of oval-shaped walnut stitch inlays with a cutout in the center to inlay a strip of Purple Heart wood. And I'd like to think of myself as a fairly knowledgeable CNC operator with hundreds of hours of experience, but this very simple design detail kicked my ass. But I think the result of how much trouble that I had working with Purple Heart led me to exactly what this table needed, so it was sort of a blessing in disguise. And no, I'm not one of those people that thinks that everything happens for a reason. I mean, it's not a very optimistic worldview, I know, but I think things just happen because circumstances, and probably more so physics, deems it so. And while the walnut stitches carve perfectly with this 1/8 inch compression bit, I did not have the same luck or ease with the Purple Heart. Here's broken bit number 1. And in the meantime, I turned my focus back to inlaying the patches on the tabletop. In order to determine what size and how many patches I need to make, and where they're all gonna go, I'm cutting up a piece of scrap cardboard. And the sizes of the stitches are gonna vary from a 5 inch by 5 inch square all the way down to a 2 by 2 inch square, with all the combinations of possible rectangle pieces such as like 4 by 5 or 2 by 3, 3 by 4, etc. And my idea is to cover almost the entirety of that large crack with all those wenge bow ties with a series of inlaid patches that I'll need to do in several stages so those patches can overlap one another. So I don't just have one cottonwood table that I'm salvaging, I have 2. So after I remodeled that kitchen in the old house, the original size of this table didn't fit in there. So I actually had to take this, put it on the CNC, and cut a smaller round. And in the process of doing so, it chipped out right here. I cut into this plywood plug on the bottom. I also cut into a domino right there. So I pretty much ruined this table, but I'm gonna use this to get all the patches that I'm gonna inlay into that table, because this table has a lot of really nice quilted grain all through here, lots of chatoyance. And I think if I use this, I'm gonna get a really nice contrast if I arrange those patches in different directions, and that's gonna look really good. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use basically from here up, salvage all of this, turn this into my patches, and then inlay those into the other cottonwood table. As I milled up this cottonwood from that old round table, I started thinking about my first dive trip and how I had enough knowledge to go diving, but I truly had no idea what I was doing. And it's very much like inlaying all these patches. And on that dive trip, I went to Cozumel, Mexico, which has fantastic diving and for me is really easy to get to. And I'm there with a friend of mine who was also one of my main dive instructors. And I'm pretty green. I have like 4 dives logged in my logbook, and these are gonna be my first ocean dives. Now I think Cozumel gets a bit of a bad rap because it's such a busy cruise ship port, and we all know that cruise ship passengers are the worst. But surprisingly, the reefs in Cozumel are really healthy, pristine, and just absolutely beautiful. It's a great place to go diving. The water is fairly warm as well. It's about 82 degrees on this first day of ocean diving. And as I roll off the boat into the crystal clear warm water, entering this magical underwater ecosystem that I'm constantly wowed by how just beautiful and alien it is, all I can think about is how bad I have to pee. And I'm wearing a wetsuit, and I don't want to just pee in the wetsuit because that's going to be gross. Also, I'm traumatized as a child from those public pools that have that special chlorine, you know, the one that turns green if you pee. Don't ask me how I know that. But I spent my first ocean dive completely miserable. I mean, I can't even focus on all the beautiful, strange marine life around me. All I can think about is how bad I have to go pee. And for 45 minutes, I was swimming around the world's biggest urinal, and I was too scared to pee in it. Later on that evening, I'm talking with my buddy, and I'm telling him about my dilemma on that first dive, and he looks at me and he says this exact line: "There's 2 kinds of people in this world, those that pee in their wetsuit and those who lie about it." Well, I'm proud to tell you I have never peed in my wetsuit on any dive ever. So the inlay process is pretty straightforward. I CA glue the patch in place that I want to inlay, which a last minute change, I decided to have all the patches start parallel to the edge of the table. And then I trace the perimeter with a marking knife. That does 2 things. First, it marks the area that I need to chisel out, while also scoring the grain exactly where you don't want to cut past. Now, I know I said I was inlaying all these patches by hand, but I think it still counts as I'm using a router to clean out most of the waste, getting as close to that line as possible without cutting into it. Then I come in with my chisel to clean up the rest. And I feel like I understand the concept of using chisels in this way. I just don't have a lot of experience doing so. Just like on that first ocean dive. I mean, I understood the concept of scuba diving, I just had no reps. And right away, I realized this is a process that I really enjoy. I mean, it takes a ton of focus, but in a good way. In a way where it's really relaxing, but also is sort of extremely frustrating if you do make a mistake. And trust me, I made my fair share of mistakes, but don't worry, I'll show you all of that. And I'd also like to point out that while I was doing all this routing and sanding, I wasn't wearing any sort of dust mask or eye protection. And I'll admit, I can get a bit complacent on that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, cottonwood sawdust is my absolute nemesis. And I must have rubbed my eye at some point during this, because the next day, my eye was really red, completely swollen. You're probably gonna see it throughout the video, but just a reminder to future Johnny and to all of you watching at home, wear your PPE.
I mean, that's pretty damn good for what an amateur I am.
So as summer heats up, it gets pretty tough working in my shop. So I was really excited when Mr. Cool reached out, and they are the sponsor of this video. I'll be installing their DIY ductless multi-zone mini split system. And not only is this going to give me air conditioning in 2 areas of my shop, but these are heat pumps, meaning I will also have heat in the winter months. And for this reason, I'm installing the first unit in my wood shop. Now this shop already has AC, but that unit is often working overtime. So having an additional unit in this room is really gonna help out. Better yet, the wood shop has no heat and it gets pretty cold in the winter, so I'm really excited about this upgrade. Now in the larger machine shop, I'm installing another zone, and this area of my shop is the hardest to work in during those extremely hot and humid Oklahoma summers. And very soon I'll be building a room within this shop around the CNC machine, and by installing this unit along this back wall, once that room is built, I'll have heat and air in the part of the shop where I do the majority of the work over at the CNC. And the great thing about the Mr. Cool DIY system is that it truly is a DIY job. And this is because the system includes pre-charged quick connect lines, meaning an HVAC professional isn't required during any steps of this installation. And the 12K, 18K, and 24K units are all Energy Star certified, and that combined with the variable speed DC inverter compressor means extra savings on energy cost. Now, the standard warranty on a Mr. Cool unit is 7 years for the compressor and 5 years on all parts. And there's also an option to upgrade to a lifetime compressor warranty. So again, let me reiterate that I have no HVAC experience. I've never installed a Mr. Cool unit before, but Mr. Cool provides everything you need along with excellent detailed instructions to where any DIYer could tackle this installation in a day or over a weekend. Mr. Cool does recommend having an electrician run the power, and electrical is one area that I don't try to DIY for obvious safety concerns. So if you're ready to get comfortable today, check out MrCoolDIY.com or just click the link in the description. And a huge thank you to Mr. Cool for sponsoring this video and making my shop much more comfortable. So here goes attempt number 2 at carving the Purple Heart inlays, and I've got those fresh bits in, and I've changed all my speeds and feeds, and I'm being way more conservative carving this Purple Heart. And it took literally all of 10 seconds to break another one of those 1/8" compression bits. So again, I'm gonna set that aside and get back to tackling those inlays. So I told you about those first ocean dives. Now let me tell you about my first 100-mile race. This is back in August of 2016. It's about 4 in the morning, and I'm about to take on the biggest run of my life. 100 miles through the mountains in the highest elevation city in the US, Leadville, Colorado. Elevation 10,200 feet at the starting line. I always had a nervous belly at the start of a race, but this was a whole other level. I mean, this particular race has 15,000 feet of elevation gain over the course of 100 miles in rugged mountain terrain, and you only have 30 hours to complete it. 30 hours seems like a long time, and it truly is, especially in the context of being on a single run. But this race has only about a 50% finishing rate, so everything has to go just right if I'm going to make it, and half the people that I'm running with won't. So I hit the porta potty before the race thinking that I've gotten rid of everything that could possibly slow me down, but I was wrong. And in the first 5 miles, I had to duck into the woods 5 times to, well, let's just say handle business. And all these pit stops added another 20, 30 minutes or maybe even a little bit more before I even reached that first checkpoint. And I remembered what a seasoned runner that helped me in my preparation for this race told me. He said there are 2 kinds of people in this world: those that poop in the woods, and those that lie about it. Well, I'm happy to report I have never pooped in the woods, ever. For some reason, I get my fair share of comments telling me that I talk too much and ramble about inane topics. Honestly, I don't see what they're talking about. But if you do enjoy these projects and my deep thoughts and my semi-deep thoughts, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, but only if you truly enjoy what you see and you want to see more. I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am for the next project, as I think it's going to be my most unique project yet. I mean, it's going to be wild. So if you're excited too, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and as always, I appreciate all of you who do that. And because I love y'all so much and appreciate you allowing me to do this thing that I love the most as my full-time day job, I'm going to give this table away to one of you. And you, the viewers, also get to decide who wins it. But I do have a couple rules. The first rule, and this is a big one, the winner of this table has to have someone that can pick this table up locally here in Oklahoma City. I know that is difficult for most of you who want to win this table, but just given my tight schedule, this is the only way it's going to work for me. Now, the second rule is that you have to nominate yourself or nominate someone else in the comments section explaining why you or the person that you nominate is deserving of winning a free table. Now, this can be for any reason that you deem necessary. I'm not going to, try to tell you what to say, but I do encourage you all to tell a compelling story because you, the viewers, get to decide who should win this table by hitting like on the comment that you think is most deserving. And exactly 3 weeks or 21 days after this video is released, the most liked comment will win the table provided that they followed rule number 1 and are able to pick the table up locally. Now, I will say the algorithm is going to favor the earliest comments, and that will have the most chance for others to see it and to hit like on. So get your comments in explaining who you think should win this table, even if it's you, and why they should win it, even if it's you, as soon as possible. Okay, back to the Purple Heart, and now I'm on my third attempt at carving these inlays, and I'm still stubbornly pushing forward on using Purple Heart for the inlays, even though off camera I broke another 1/8 inch bit, but that must be the issue, and now I've switched to using a 1/4 inch bit, so I shouldn't have any more issues in theory. I don't know what it is about the last couple weeks, but the simplest tasks that I try to do, the things that are usually really easy for me, haven't been going well. And this Purple Heart inlay is an example of that. My idea was to do these walnut stitches that are going to go in between the two slabs and then inlay a Purple Heart in the middle, mostly because I just absolutely love the combination of walnut and Purple Heart. What I didn't realize is that apparently Purple Heart is crazy difficult to machine, and I couldn't really figure out why I was having so many issues. I broke 3 1/8 inch bits right there. That's $100 in broken bits. Then as I was carving this, almost every single one of these, as it would finish the carve, it would just rip out the end. And I had no idea what was going on. I kept changing my speeds and feeds and just trying to figure out like, okay, how do I get these settings dialed in for Purple Heart? Then I did a little bit of research and come to find out Purple Heart is notorious for being bad at machining. So what I've decided to do is just completely scrap the idea of using Purple Heart. What would look better is if I inlaid cottonwood into these. So that's what we're gonna do. I've got a couple pieces, I've got them all milled up. We're gonna go back out to the CNC and I'm gonna make like my 5th attempt at carving these little inlays for these walnut stitches. And hopefully this time I can get them all carved and we can get this table finished because I'm frustrated. Dude, it's like perfect. I mean, that is amazing. Wow. This is just going to tie in with the table much better than Purple Heart. And while I'm not glad I broke $100 worth of CNC bits and ruined a $50 piece of Purple Heart, going with cottonwood inlays just makes so much more sense with this table. I'll also mention cottonwood is a fairly soft wood, not something that you often see on dining tables, but after having not one but two cottonwood tables in my home for over 3 years, I can say they held up great with only a few minor scratches here and there. Honestly, nothing more than you'd likely find on any other table with 3 years of use. So cutting these all off the CNC leaves some residue from those tabs, and those are the ones that you're always seeing me cut off at the CNC. And even though I use that multi-tool, there is still a tiny bit of wood left sitting proud of the surface, and I can quickly clean that up on this disc sander. I'm also running these through the drum sander to dial in the fit down in the slabs, and I offset these by a few thousandths of an inch, and they were still not fitting correctly, so here I'm removing as little material as possible until I can get these to fit down into the table. And since I had 5 tries to cut the stitch inlays, I was able to get that tolerance dialed in perfectly, as you saw a minute ago, but these still needed a bit of cleanup from those tabs. And you see all the clamps laying here that I thought I was going to need for this operation, but this was such a tight press fit that I didn't end up having to use clamps at all. My hope was that I could reuse the table base that I built 3 years ago when I first made this table, but after cutting down the size, it just didn't fit any longer. So I am going to weld up a new set of table legs, and my gut told me just to keep it as simple as possible on these legs. There's already a lot going on the top of this table, so I wanted the base to have a more classic design that doesn't detract from the top. So here's the design that I came up with. It's just your basic inverted trapezoid, and I'm using 2x4 rectangle tube steel with a 1/4 inch thick, 6-inch wide piece of flat bar steel as the top. Using my Lincoln Electric Power MIG 215 welder, I welded up the base, and since I've been doing so much welding lately, I feel much more confident about my skills, and I was laying down some really nice beads.
Baby, that looks good.
Now, I've said it a bunch in my videos recently, but I truly believe anyone can weld, especially if you have the right equipment. So I've got links for everything that you see me using here down below. One of the most common replies that I get in my videos is some version of like, oh, I could build that if I had all your tools, or, oh yeah, that's pretty easy when you have $50 million worth of tools in your shop. And over the last 6 years, I have built up quite a large collection, but I don't have anything close to $50 million worth of tools, although I am trying. And never mind that I started all of this with just a drill and a circular saw working on the floor of my garage. But I still have some tools that I'd like to add to my collection, and I think number one on that list right now is a mill. Especially for operations like this, where I need to create an elongated hole in this 1/4 inch steel plate. Now, I got the job done with a hodgepodge of tools, but these holes were not pretty, and it bothers me having ugly holes even though they're going to be hidden underneath the table. So maybe the Tool Fairy will bring me a mill in the future, and if you guys out there have any suggestions for a small footprint mill, please let me know in the comments section down below. I actually read a bunch of the comments, especially when it's really good advice. And speaking of, I did have a viewer reach out and give me a bunch of tips on upgrading that new sliding table saw that I have. And in those conversations, that viewer sent me a link to this tool called a rivet nut, or a rib nut, I guess. I don't know the exact name for it, but essentially, after drilling the appropriate size hole, you can rivet in a threaded insert. And so I'm using this on the underside of those legs to add a 3/8 threaded insert for easy attachment of the leveling feet later on. This is an awesome little gadget. I'll make sure I drop an Amazon affiliate link down below if you want to check it out as well. Now, I wish I was able to powder coat my steel table legs, but it does take about 3 to 4 weeks to send it off and get it back. So I'm just going to use rattle cans to spray on a black gloss enamel. And if you take your time building up the layers, you can get a really professional looking finish just using spray paint. Now, I do plan on building my own powder coating oven in the future, and it's probably not worth making a full YouTube video out of that build process, so honestly it may never happen, but just know that's what I would want to do if I had the extra time. Back to the tabletop, and it's time to put everything together by inlaying these stitches. And this probably doesn't look like a very sturdy way to connect these slabs, but having never tried this technique before myself, I can confidently say that I think it's going to be just fine. I mean, there are 23 stitches in total, each of those spaced 3.5 inches apart. So while it may look sort of delicate, my guess is this is going to be a pretty strong connection, or at least I hope so for whoever wins this table. Most of the stitches had a nice tight fit, but there were some gaps there on the stitches, as well as some gaps around the cottonwood patches, and I need to address all of those. And to do this, I'm going to use a combination of the glue and sawdust strip. But I'll also cut some thin strips of cottonwood and some thin strips of walnut and fill any of the larger gaps with those. If you remember earlier in the video, I screwed all those strips to the underside of the table to lock the position of the slabs in place. And unfortunately, that left me with over 60 little holes in the bottom that I've got to come back and plug up. There were also these larger holes left behind by the threaded inserts that were the attachment points for the original table base. So I'm going through with a Forstner bit attached to this drill guide to drill out all of these holes. And then using a set of plug cutters, I drill all the plugs that I need to fill these holes. And again, with over 60 holes to drill, I had to make a lot of plugs. And as always, I like to know who watches my videos to the end. So if you watch this far into the video, comment this. And if you're not subscribed, please do so. And always, I appreciate everyone who does that. And as a reminder, in order to win this table, you have to be willing to pick it up here in Oklahoma City or arrange for someone else who can. And you need to nominate yourself or someone else down in the comment section and explain why you or they are deserving of winning this table. And whoever gets the most likes after 3 weeks of this video being released will win the table. So if you're not even going to try to win, just make sure you hit like on the comment that you think is most deserving. So throughout this video, I've talked about how I'm all or nothing and how at one point or another, my different hobbies sort of took over my life. And first it was scuba diving, and then it was running, and now it's designing and building furniture. And I really must say that I do miss scuba diving. I just miss being underwater, swimming amongst the beautiful reefs, and getting to see all the colorful marine life up close. I also miss running all the time and being in really good shape, although my knees are loving the break. But there is something really special when you get to experience the mountains and nature on your own 2 feet to take you to places that most folks will never get to see with their own eyes. But as much as I miss that time of my life, I don't think I've ever enjoyed something as much as I do making these videos and building these projects. I've never really had a creative outlet before I found woodworking and making, and it's really fulfilling, and I just want to do it all the time. I know I mention this in every video, but it still doesn't come close to relaying how much I appreciate you all watching my videos, putting up on my dad jokes, and buying my merch. And I don't just try to pass myself off as a complete expert on everything that I do here. Just like it's okay to pee in your wetsuit, or it's okay to poop in the woods, it's okay not to be an expert. It's okay to just throw yourself in the mix and learn something new. And while I do have this big shop full of all these tools, you don't need that to get started. The most important thing that you need is desire. And if you have that, you'll be willing to put in the reps and learn as much as you can, and really to make peace with failure. And I really want to know what everyone thinks of this table, because my guess is at least half of you hate the patches and the stitches. And I get it, it's definitely not a traditional looking table, but personally I find beauty in highlighting mistakes and defects, and I'm guessing some of you do as well. Because really, there's 2 types of people in this world: those that make mistakes and those that lie about it. And obviously, you've never seen me make a mistake, because I already know I'm going to get a ton of comments saying that anything you said on this table is just going to fall through the middle. I've got a little plate and a cup, and we're going to test it out real quick.